this on the roll. Okay, I think we are recording now. I'm actually going to hide my thumbnail video screen just because that is showing up on the video, but I'll just drag that right over here. Hello, welcome. If for those of you who are maybe watching this for the first time, my name is Kira. I'm the Substance Use Prevention Coordinator with the City of Somerville. And this is the second presentation in our kind of summer 2020 virtual training series. And today's topic is going to be on marijuana. So if you have any questions, please feel free to just pop them into the chat box on Zoom, and we will be answering those at the very end of all of this. And for anyone who has further questions or maybe is interested in more resources, my contact information will be at the end of this. So please feel free to reach out to me as well after all of this is over if you don't get the opportunity to get all of your questions answered. So, oh, 1 second. Looks like we have someone joining us. Oh, yep. So, what is marijuana? This might seem like a slightly obvious question to some of us, but marijuana is technically the mixture of the crush and dried leaves of the cannabis sativa plant, which we can see here pictured on the right. It contains two chemicals in particular that we are very interested in. I will probably butcher their names, so I apologize in advance. The first of which is tetrahydrocannabinol, also known as THC, and the second chemical is called cannabidiol, which is more formally known as CBD. So what these two different chemicals do is actually quite different. THC is the psychoactive substance that's actually going to make a user experience that feeling of being high. CBD does not actually get you high based on its own nature. However, like THC, it actually will bind to the brain's natural receptors, and we'll get into the neurobiology of that in just a little bit. And the interesting question that I found myself asking actually when I was looking into this presentation is, why do these cannabinoids even exist? And the answer is, we're actually not really sure why. However, some scientists do think that these chemicals were actually developed over time to help protect the cannabis sativa plant from basically high UV rays. The cannabis sativa plant is originally from the high steppe region of Central Asia, where there's certainly a lot of sun and UV exposure. So it may actually be kind of the plant's natural sunscreen, so to speak. But, you know, we're still kind of exploring into a lot of the research behind this in some ways. And another interesting question to kind of look at here, because this is certainly something that has changed over the course of the years, is how is marijuana consumed? I think a lot of people think of the traditional kind of almost cigarette-looking ways of smoking marijuana. That would be hand-rolled cigarettes are called typically joints, cigar wraps, which are a little bit thicker and shorter, called blunts. You also have people who smoke it through pipes, and also water pipes, which are more commonly known as bongs. Nowadays, you can also find marijuana that can be orally consumed in teas and other food items, especially we see a lot of baked goods and candies, and these are typically known as edibles. And last but not least, and this is a very important segment actually, this is relatively new on the market, so to speak, but we are now seeing marijuana being sold in the form of resins that have varying levels of hardness. Sometimes you might see them almost as like a very liquidy oil form, other times looking a little bit more thick, like a really frozen piece of maple syrup. These are known as hash oil, butter, and shatter. You can consume these both orally, but you can also now smoke them via vaping devices, which for those of you who missed last week's talk on nicotine and vaping, we did a lot of talk around e-cigarettes and vaping and how that is kind of changing a lot of people's interactions with smoking, and certainly marijuana is now also a part of that as well. If we actually look here at this chart, we tend to see marijuana products being sold retail-wise into 4 different main categories. Flower, which is again the crushed leaves and flowers of the plant that you typically crush up and smoke in the form of joints and also blunts. You have edibles, other products, which I'll get into a little bit later, and then also here you have concentrates. And this is actually from a July 2019 business market report that was looking at consumer spending habits in the US. And as you can see here, we are expecting, oops, my bad, we are expecting flower and marijuana concentrates to explode in the market over the course of the next actually 2 to 3 years, from about 4 and 1 billion respectively to about $10.5 billion a year, which is pretty astonishing. And I think one of the things to concentrate on with this is the fact that e-cigarettes and vaping are increasingly on the rise. And as we see vaping going up and up and up in terms of use, we also see an increase in marijuana concentrates being sold for vaping devices as well. And we're going to get into why that is in just a little bit. Now, how exactly does marijuana work? Let's say you're smoking a traditional joint. The THC within marijuana immediately enters the bloodstream, which carries it also pretty immediately into the brain. And the reason why this happens so fast is because THC actually really closely resembles a neurotransmitter that is already in our brain called anandamide. And anandamide is something that we are still, again, trying to understand quite a bit more. But so far as what we can tell, anandamide sends information to the brain about pain. Anandamide is a neurotransmitter. I maybe should have explained this just a few seconds ago. A neurotransmitter is basically a very tiny chemical messenger that sends information throughout the brain without us really consciously realizing it. It often is happening within milliseconds. And neurotransmitters send information ranging from us remembering the differences between red, yellow, and green for traffic light signals, to how to have our livers processing, to remembering lyrics of songs. Neurotransmitters contain all of that very vital information. So we also need to think about other parts of the brain as well. As you can see here, marijuana has an impact on a substantial part of the brain as soon as it enters the body's bloodstream. Everything from motor control and muscle coordination to appetite, hormonal levels, sexual behavior, planning, and also the reward system in particular being very activated. But one of the things that I like to focus on is this little section right here, which is the amygdala. And this is one of the tiniest parts of the human brain, and it is also one of the oldest parts of the human brain that has survived with us over the course of millennia. And the thing that makes it so important to us even now is the fact that it is pretty much the hub for these very, very intense and strong emotions of anxiety, fear, and panic. So when we think about marijuana impacting the brain and it activating the amygdala and all of the really, really strong and sometimes not always positive emotions that are to be found there, we definitely need to be thinking a lot about how marijuana can potentially impact not just the brain, but just our overall mental and emotional and physical functioning throughout life, period. And that leads me into another segment, which we're starting to kind of venture a little bit more closely into mental health here, but here are some general reasons behind why consumers seem to be motivated to use marijuana on a purely recreational basis, not a medical basis, but purely recreational. And this is from another business market report from back in January of 2018. And I think one of the most interesting things for me when I saw these numbers was the very first two reasons, with relaxing and sleeping coming in at 51% and reducing stress and anxiety coming in at 49%. I think, if we just look purely at these numbers, we are seeing a huge part of the motivation behind people smoking recreationally is to reduce stress and anxiety. And if you go through some of these other things as well, you'll see other things that have to do with mood as well. Improving my mood, helping me to concentrate and think, helping me to connect with other people, and also making things interesting, whether that be activities at home or at school or at work. I think another element that we want to point out here too is the social element. So having fun with friends is also fairly high up there at 35%. Making activities interesting, especially again, group or communal activities, that can definitely be another aspect of this as well. And also, this last one right here, 16%, to help me feel connected to other people. I think this is particularly important for us to keep in mind with youth, which is again something we'll get into in a little bit, and how easily it can fall for youth to want to try marijuana for a recreational reason because of that, maybe wanting to have that sense of connection with other people. And also, unfortunately, sometimes a lot of elements of peer pressure, wanting to fit in. So I don't think that that's necessarily limited to just youth, but I do think that it is certainly a risk factor for why youth might be tempted to use recreationally. And it's something that we need to kind of continue to keep our eyes on in terms of doing a lot of work around youth prevention. Now, I also want to go into a little bit of the history of this because it's actually quite interesting the way that we've changed how we use marijuana over the course of quite a long time, actually. So, one of the things I don't think that people necessarily realize is we've actually been using the cannabis sativa plant since at least 3000 BC. So that's about 5,000 years ago. There are some historical sources that suggest we might have even been using it earlier than that, but 3000 BC is, I think, the date that most archaeologists can generally agree on. It appears mostly to have been grown for the production of hemp, which is actually a fiber that we still use today. You might have seen hemp in clothing, bracelets, and jewelry accessories. And back again in around the time of, I guess, 3000 BC, it was being used for that, but also for things like textiles, ropes, and it was also being grown as an edible grain, which is something that actually has slowly started to come back into modern day practices as well. There are also some indications that marijuana may also have been used for medical and religious or spiritual purposes as well. But it's not really until about the 1830s that we really start to see marijuana becoming what we now kind of realize it as today. In the 1830s, you have Sir William Brooke O'Shaughnessy in Ireland discovering that cannabis extracts can actually help with stomach pain, nausea, and vomiting in cholera patients, which was especially important because cholera was a very widespread and common disease at the time. And you flash forward about 40, 50 years, and by the 1880s, marijuana is now being sold everywhere in pharmacies and also being prescribed very commonly by doctors, mostly for stomach complaints. Another really interesting and important thing to note at this time, though, is that by the end of the 19th century, marijuana plants are still containing very minimal levels of THC, and that's something again that we're going to get into a little bit later. But also just kind of found some interesting little vintage examples of some of those cannabis medications and products that were being sold at the time. Oh, excuse me, I think I'm about to sneeze. Oh, okay. So this all started to change, I'd say probably around the time of about 1910 going into the 1920s and 1930s, where previously during the 1880s and 1890s, you see just a whole lot of different substances and products on the market. It was kind of the pharmaceutical Wild West in a way, where you have everything from alcohol for cough syrup for babies, to cocaine pills to help treat headaches. And it was around the time of 1910, 1920s that you start to see the United States at least, passing a lot more laws and regulations around, hey, you need to actually be listing all of the ingredients that you are selling in your products, and you need to hold your ingredients up to a certain standard for health reasons. And you also start to see a major shift in how people are viewing substances. Just for the sake of today's presentation, I won't get into the rest of it, but here are some examples right in front of us from a movie that was called Reefer Madness that was produced and released in 1936. And as you can see here, marijuana has traveled a long way from this to this. I strongly encourage people to go and watch the YouTube trailer for Reefer Madness. It's quite interesting. But I think one of the other things we want to keep in mind as well around why marijuana in particular started to see this huge transition in the terms of the court of public opinion is a lot of things that had to do with racism, anti-immigration stances against migrant workers in Mexico, and a lot of it is still something that we actually are still seeing the repercussions of today in terms of, again, how we have kind of come to include marijuana on the war on drugs. Now, like I had mentioned, 1920s, you start to see a lot more laws being passed in the US. 1937, the US takes it a step farther and they pass something called the Marijuana Tax Act, which criminalizes marijuana nationwide and placed a pretty hefty excise tax on the sale, possession, and transfer of all hemp products. And probably one of the reasons why they actually didn't ban hemp is because it was an important homegrown textile during World War II, when there were certainly a lot of shortages in everything. And then you flash forward past World War II to 1970, where we have this gentleman on the right, President Nixon, passing something called the Controlled Substances Act as part of the so-called war on drugs. Marijuana becomes a Schedule I drug alongside heroin, LSD, and ecstasy, and to this day, it actually continues to remain a Schedule I drug. And then this is just something that continued to evolve and evolve throughout the 80s and the 90s. And I certainly even remember this from my own childhood. You have this huge expansion with the Just Say No campaigns, DARE in schools. We see Nancy Reagan on the right here doing a lot of work speaking to the students. And overall, again, just on a federal level, marijuana has just continued to remain a very contentious substance in the course of the conversation around substance use in the US. Don't know why this is not working. Here we go. So now we need to flash forward to current day 2020. Marijuana remains classified, like I mentioned earlier, as a Schedule I drug by the federal government. However, as of 2019, 39 states and the District of Columbia have now passed some form of legalization of marijuana for medical and or recreational use. However, hemp plants can now actually be grown in all 50 states for the purposes of fibers, grain, seed, and also CBD oils, which for the most part are being sold to skincare and cosmetic companies. As one of the things that some people might have noticed just in terms of, just even going out and shopping is a lot of stores and even a lot of small scale business owners are now selling CBD products in a lot of skincare and cosmetic items. And this is something that is, I think, going to continue to evolve as part of the market moving forward. We also have one FDA approved medication, which is called Epidiolex. You can see it right here on the right. And this is the only CBD medication that has been approved. It is now being used as a treatment for Dravet syndrome and Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, which are two rare and extremely severe forms of epilepsy that do occur during infancy and early childhood. But this is, again, the only CBD medication that has technically been approved on a national level. And if we look at specifically Massachusetts, which is a state that has passed legalization around adult recreational medical marijuana use, you can now obtain medical marijuana card to obtain marijuana from a legal dispensary. You will need to get a referral from a doctor to show that you do in fact have a valid medical condition. You can also purchase marijuana for recreational, again, adult use only, from legal dispensaries as well. And just to, again, really drive this point home, marijuana can still only be purchased and consumed by adults 21 years of age and older. It is illegal to buy marijuana outside of the legal dispensary, and also it is illegal to sell marijuana to minors. One of the things that I'm also going to stop here and talk about very quickly is one of the reasons why it is so important for people to buy their medical and recreational marijuana from the legal dispensaries only is because a lot of what is now being sold on the quote unquote black market or on the street is marijuana that has typically been tampered with by dealers and also by people who are selling it. One of the things that we are seeing is often the combination of marijuana with chemicals like ecstasy, angel dust, and other really dangerous psychoactive substances. And sometimes we are also seeing marijuana even being sold with fentanyl in it, which for those of you who are not aware of what fentanyl is a synthetic opiate, which is now very commonly being sold on the street, sometimes in lieu of like more pure retrograde heroin, because it is so much cheaper to produce. It's also about it's infinitely stronger than actual heroin is on its own, and for that reason, we are very, very concerned about anyone buying any particular substance off the street these days, because we cannot guarantee that there isn't fentanyl in it. And fentanyl can be extremely dangerous and cause overdoses extremely rapidly. And, you know, that is just something that we need to be very aware of as well moving forward. Moving on to some other aspects of unlawfulness. An employer may still refuse you employment if you submit a positive drug screen during your hiring process. This is especially true for individuals who are looking for jobs within the government, security, the military, education, or healthcare positions. It is illegal to consume marijuana in public. This includes parks, playgrounds, sidewalks. It also includes your car. We'll get into that in a little bit. If you are caught smoking marijuana in public in Somerville, there is a $300 fine that you will have to pay. It is also illegal to use marijuana inside of a motor vehicle, whether it is on or off, having an open container of marijuana in your vehicle, and also, and possibly most importantly, driving while under the influence. And like I had mentioned earlier, it is illegal to sell marijuana to minors, nor are minors allowed to smoke or possess marijuana. Which leads us to another interesting topic for debate. Is marijuana safe? There are certainly individuals for whom we specifically recommend do not consume marijuana. We don't recommend that pregnant mothers consume marijuana. We are also very concerned about lung scarring due to smoking marijuana, as well as the impact of marijuana on the liver in individuals who have hepatitis. If you have slower metabolism, this could also have an impact on how you feel the impact of marijuana products, especially edibles. Someone with a slower metabolism may take one edible and not feel anything within the first, say, half hour. And that's actually pretty normal. Most edibles don't kick in until they've been in your system for a slightly longer period of time. Someone who is relatively new to edibles, though, may not know that, and they may end up taking another 2 or 3 within the course of that same hour in order to feel that impact of being high or to feel the effect of the THC a lot sooner. And unfortunately, that can sometimes lead to some pretty nasty episodes of panic attacks and anxiety, amongst other issues. Marijuana can also significantly increase your heart rate, which can pose some pretty significant problems for people who have cardiovascular or heart health issues. So overall, I think probably the most important thing I can say is that if you have any history, again, of heart issues, lung conditions like asthma, COPD, pneumonia, chronic bronchitis, or again, if you have any kind of issues with hepatitis and you're still in treatment for your hepatitis, we strongly recommend that you reconsider smoking marijuana. And another question that I hear about quite frequently from people is people who say to me, oh, but marijuana isn't like other substances. I'm not going to experience withdrawal from that because I can't get addicted to marijuana. And the answer to that is actually, yes, you can become dependent on marijuana. And yes, you actually can experience withdrawal symptoms from marijuana. Is it going to be necessarily as dangerous or as fatal as, say, alcohol withdrawal or opiate withdrawal? No. But there are definitely a lot of aspects to marijuana withdrawal that are certainly not pleasant. There's a lovely article here from Harvard Medical School that I recommend people check out. But another thing that I guess I can just say in summary is a lot of people who I've worked with who have gone through withdrawal from marijuana have complained about everything from irritation to changes in mood to difficulties with focus and concentration, fatigue, a whole lot of other symptoms. So it is definitely not a substance that you can use without experiencing some consequences. We've already talked about a few of the things that we're concerned about, but I also wanted to hem in a couple of other subjects as well. One of the things that we are a little bit concerned about is the fact that because marijuana remains a Schedule I drug, there is a lack of federal standards and regulations around ingredient potency and which new strains of CBD and THC are entering the retail market. Basically, if we look at, say, a carton of apple juice, for instance, across all 50 states, there are certain regulations on ingredients, what can go into that juice, what can't go into the juice, how you have to label it, etc., etc. And that's true again across the entire country. With CBD, THC, we don't have any of those regulations. So you could buy one product, say here in Massachusetts, and then go to Colorado and get a very similar product, but it could have a completely different level of potency. And we just don't have any way to guarantee a certain level of standardization throughout the market across state lines. Each state may also not hold marijuana manufacturers to the same level of oversight, which can sometimes result in the sale of tainted products to companies who are making these CBD retail products. I think, and this is something I touched upon at the very beginning of the presentation, but which I also really want to focus on right now, is the level of THC in marijuana has significantly increased. We are not looking at the same marijuana that we were smoking in, say, the 1970s. We are not looking at the same marijuana that we were smoking back in 1880. We're not looking at the same marijuana that we were even smoking, I'd say, back in 2000. It's estimated that THC levels in marijuana have risen from roughly about 4% in the 1990s to 12% today, and you have some strains that are as strong as 37%. This is directly due to genetic alterations that humans have made to the cannabis sativa plant in order to purposefully increase the levels of THC. And that is one of the things that, especially with both the youth who I've worked with and also the adult clients who I have worked with, a lot of people will say to me, oh, I'm so sorry, there seems to be a lawn mowing experiment happening outside my window. Okay, it seems to have gone now. As I was saying, a lot of people who I'm working with for the first time will come to me and say things like, yeah, but it's a natural plant. You know, marijuana comes from the earth. You know, it's totally natural and organic. And that's the part where I step in and say, well, is it a plant? Yes. But we're also looking at plants that have been altered. We're not looking at marijuana as it might have been found in Mongolia 50 years ago. We are looking at a very, very different sort of plant with a very, very different level of potency. And not every single person is aware of that, and not every single person realizes that there may be a certain level of risk involved with that as well for themselves. And moving on, if my computer will cooperate with me. Here's another part to focus on. Who are we concerned about? And we're certainly going to be focusing a lot on youth prevention right now, but just kind of, again, for both youth and adults, there is a lot of conflicting evidence over whether marijuana is useful for the treatment of mental health conditions. Marijuana with specifically higher levels of THC has been shown to induce anxiety, panic, and even psychosis in some individuals. Again, I want to highlight the fact that this is really specifically talking about marijuana with those higher levels of THC. And I also want to make another point that even if you are smoking marijuana with a high level of THC and you are experiencing, say, auditory or visual hallucinations or paranoia, marijuana does not cause schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder or bipolar disorder. Those are all genetic illnesses. They are inherited. They are a part of your brain from the moment that you are born. It can certainly, however, marijuana with high levels of THC can certainly worsen those symptoms in people who may have those mental health diagnoses already. Individuals with other risk factors and maybe a history of substance abuse or substance use of other things, they might also be a little bit more susceptible to becoming dependent on marijuana. And finally, marijuana is also being used for the treatment of a lot of medical conditions these days, including, and I think I want to highlight this especially, chronic pain. But we still need to do a lot more research around the long-term impacts of marijuana or CBD treatments on chronic pain. And I will say that CBD may eventually be useful as a treatment tool. However, it is not a cure for chronic pain or for any other disease or illness so far as we understand it at this time. And again, like I mentioned earlier, we're especially worried about youth development. The adolescent brain continues to develop until about the age of 25 for women and 26 for men. And we have a lot of actually pretty solid research to indicate that a frequent, heavy, and recurrent marijuana use in your youth under the age of 25 can actually temporarily and sometimes even permanently impact your brain development, which especially is important in terms of learning, retaining information, and also maintaining motivation and focus. But interestingly enough, the fastest growing age demographic for marijuana use are individuals who are 55 years of age and older, which might be a bit of a surprise to some people. I know it was to me when I started to look into this a little bit more. I think one of the factors that we might need to take into consideration with that, and also this article from National Institute of Health points out, people who are above the age of 55 may be trying to look for alternative treatments for chronic physical and mental health conditions, which not only speaks to a need for possibly more medical and mental health resources for this particular age group, but we also need to keep in mind that this is an age group for which there may be a whole other set of risk factors. But again, we still need to do a lot more research on this topic. In conclusion, individuals who have any kind of pre-existing medical and or mental health conditions should always consult with a provider if they have concerns or questions about consuming marijuana. It should never be bought off the street, only from legal dispensaries, and it should only be bought and used by adults, never by minors. And really, I think the biggest thing that I want to get through to people is that marijuana can have a very major impact on your brain and on your body, and people really just need to educate themselves and be aware of the fact that there may be risks and or consequences depending on your specific body and your specific health history. And I also want to just mention a few other things here as well. First of all, there are a lot of resources out there for people who are looking to maybe either decrease or completely stop their marijuana use. I am by no means not trying to point a finger at anyone who is choosing to use marijuana on a recreational basis, but for those individuals who are interested in getting help, who do feel as though they are developing a significant enough problem with marijuana that they think they need that extra assistance. Marijuana Anonymous has meetings both in person and these days, in the time of COVID, many virtual meetings as well. For those who are not interested in a traditional 12-step program, I can also recommend Smart Recovery as well. And they, again, have meetings that are both in person and also virtually as well. Some other resources, the Recovery Centers of America, which actually has a couple of treatment centers here in Massachusetts, they actually are offering virtual meetings on their Facebook page, live Facebook videos, essentially, several days a week. I strongly recommend that you check that out. For those who are looking for something with a little bit more of a meditative or mindful focus, there are a lot of virtual meetings being offered by recoverydharma.online, which is a group of individuals who are practicing recovery and sobriety through traditional Buddhist mindfulness and meditation techniques. The Phoenix is another amazing resource that we are lucky enough to have here in Boston. The Phoenix is a national gym organization, actually, and they specifically are run and staffed by people who are in recovery, and they are specifically looking to bring people into the gym who themselves are in the stages of trying to find their sobriety and recovery. You do not have to pay any membership fees to get into the Phoenix. All you have to do is have at least 24 hours of consistent sobriety in order to join any of their classes or use any of their workout equipment. And they also have a series of virtual meetings that are happening right now as well on their website. Because we are also in the days of technology, we also have three actually different options. The Chess Health Connections app, which can be downloaded off of this website right here, www.addictionpolicy.org, is one app that kind of will guide you through different sobriety and recovery techniques. You also have from the App Store, Sober Grid and Celebrate Recovery. I think it's important for me to mention that these three apps are not specifically highlighting any one particular substance that you may be seeking recovery and sobriety from, but they may still be helpful in a general way to keep you motivated and connected to people throughout the day. For teens and youth, Marijuana Anonymous and Smart Recovery both offer meetings that are specifically for teens, I would say typically over the age of 13, 14, 15. So that is another resource that people can access as well. I think, actually, let me just look at that. Okay, so I think another thing that I will point out before I kind of start to wrap up for today is that unlike other substances like alcohol, cocaine, heroin, other opiates on the street, some of the more severe psychoactive substances like ecstasy, it is not easy to find the quote unquote traditional forms of substance use treatment at higher levels of care for marijuana. It is not something that we have formal detoxes for. It is not something that we have specific residential programs or transitional programs built up for. So we are still in a time period where we are actually still developing a lot of these programs and different treatment programs for youth, especially. However, we strongly recommend that you check out SAMHSA, or you go onto the mass.gov, not the mass.gov, the Massachusetts State Helpline website, which is actually again listed at the very end of all of this. And they may be able to get you connected to a healthcare facility or to a therapist who might be able to speak with you further about different treatment options. I have a couple of different references here that you may be interested in looking at. Many of these are historical. Some of them also have to deal with the actual biological and neurobiology around marijuana and CBD and THC. And also, again, all of the things that have to do with legality, which states is it legal in, which states is it not legal in, the legalities behind CBD, and the very, quite frankly, strong differences in some ways between CBD and THC products. And that, I believe, is it for today. We thank you very much for joining us tonight. We're very interested in getting feedback, so if you would like to take a quick minute after this to go to the following link here and fill out a brief questionnaire about how we did, what we could improve on, we would certainly appreciate hearing that from folks. And if you have any other questions, you can please feel free to reach out to us. All of our social media information is down here below. You can also check out our website, which is part of the somervillema.gov website. My contact information, my phone number, my email is there as well. So please do feel free to reach out to me if you have any sorts of additional questions. Thank you very much for joining us. And also, if you are not able to catch this during our live 6 to 7 p.m. showings on Zoom, we are now uploading all of these videos and recording them and putting them onto our brand new YouTube channel, which is known as City of Somerville Prevention Services. So please check us out on YouTube and continue to check out the other videos that we have posted already, and continue to keep an eye out there for more videos, especially as we continue to do more and more virtual trainings and presentations, probably throughout the rest of 2020.